Bonjour, hello, and I can still not read that. I'm Pierre Desrochers, I'm the Chief Privacy Officer at Statistics Canada, and welcome to our next panel here. Usable for all, making government services accessible and frictionless. I got that right? Oui. We have a very distinguished panel today. Very distinguished. I'll introduce them all, and then we'll start with a series of questions. And if we have time, we'll go back to the audience for questions. Je vais commencer. I'll start with Stéphanie Cadieux. She's the Chief Accessibility Officer of Canada. And I will then Clara Morgan. She's the Director of the Office of Public Services Accessibility, Treasury Board of Canada, Secretariat. Following by Jonathan Finch. He's the Director of Digital Engineering of, I can't read. Experience, thank you, I'm getting old. Office of Management and Budget at the United States. With Dino Zappa, who is the Acting CIO at Accessibility Standards of Canada, and Martin Boucher, the Director of Government Digital Communications, Government Communications Secretariat, Ministry of Executive Council, Government of Quebec. Bienvenue, welcome. So I'll start off with a simple question. I'll take off my glasses for that. What is happening in your area to ensure that as services are digitized, they're accessible to everyone? Who would like to answer that first?
I'm going to go ahead. Can you hear me?
The first one.
Yeah? Okay. So, bonjour tout le monde. What's happening in Quebec is we've been working for 7 years now to replace old websites, some 300, maybe 400 websites that were not accessible, and we're migrating all those content in one unified platform, Quebec.ca. So we're basically replacing non-accessible content with accessible content. It's not a copy and paste job. We're rewriting and restructuring content. We find out that there's a lot of duplicates of content also. So we work on that level, on the content level. And we use Quebec.ca as sort of a Trojan horse to influence the way transactional services are developed, because we want to have those services linked to Quebec.ca, because the normal transit of citizens, they are looking for services, they end up on content, and from those content, they access transactional platforms. So we want to have the whole picture unified, and that's how we are looking for to influence how transactional services are accessible. We are dealing with the great divide between communications team that deals with content and IT teams that deals with transactional services. So we have to work to bridge that divide. I don't know if it's good English to say that. And what we're developing is a design system for transactional services in order to make the service look like Quebec.ca, but to comply with principles, namely accessibility.
Any of our other panelists would like to also interject on that concept? Maybe Dino, Jonathan, Stephanie? Allez-y.
Hello, is that working? Are we up? Yeah, we go. Hi. What's working well? The fact that we're having a conversation about accessible technology. That's a good thing. But accessibility is now starting to get the space and time that it deserves. But it's going to take more time to mainstream it into how we do business as governments. And getting to the place where we no longer tolerate or accept inaccessibility is going to take some time. We have to get to that place where we are expecting accessibility from the start in everything we do and everything we buy. But we're not there, but we're headed in the right direction. The biggest challenges, I think, are the assumptions and the bias that we hold, the assumptions that we make. Digitalization is great. Heck, I was an entrepreneur in the online retail space in 1998. So I like it. I like the idea, okay? But we make assumptions that digital, that self-serve are the solution. They're not. They are one solution. And some things and some people, they work for some people and for some things, but not all of the time and not for everyone. And we have to remember that when we're going down this path. I'm going to give you an example. People want to reach out to me in my office as the first Chief Accessibility Officer in the country. They want to give me their ideas. They want me to tell me what the problems they have accessing services. They have questions, and they have solutions. But we don't have a phone number. The only way to access my office is by email. And not everyone has access. Not everyone can, whether it be because they don't have high-speed internet in rural and remote communities, whether it is because of poverty and they don't have access to a computer or a phone or internet service, or whether they are my father at 80 who just wants to talk to a person. He knows how to use the phone. He's not interested in getting a cell phone. And that's the reality. There are people for whom digital doesn't work. So we have to keep that in our perspective. We have to know that everything we do, we have to have multiple channels of access. New technologies have been transforming the way we do things for a long time now. I was part of a research study into bank machine terminals in about 2001, trying to get to some kind of standardization and to what is an accessible banking terminal. And I can tell you that to this day, I cannot access at least half of the ones that are out there. So whether we are withdrawing money, whether we are ordering food, whether we are buying a bus ticket or a ticket to a hockey game, we have to have options, and we cannot make assumptions that everybody will do it the way we do.
Thank you. Jonathan?
Yeah, I'll maybe try to follow that. And it's so great to be here with this panel with you all. I've had the privilege of attending a handful of these global summits over the past year or so, and I'm always amazed to see how common the challenges and problems that we're all working on tend to be. This is a huge focus for us in the US. We've come at it from a policy perspective in a couple different ways. At the start of our current administration, the president signed an executive order on customer experience that really shined a light on the experience that we're delivering to members of the American public. Our team followed that up last year with additional policy, the first of which was on delivering a digital-first public experience. I'm going to talk a little bit about what digital first means to build on some of Stephanie's points. Middle of last year and then late last year, we actually released a policy specifically focused on digital accessibility to really stress the importance of, as we become a digital first government, making sure that we do so in an equitable and accessible way. Maybe three kind of quick themes as it relates to accessibility. The first is accessibility in the truest sense of the word. 60 million members of the American public live with a disability and may need to use assistive technology to access digital services and websites. And so really focused on ensuring that we're building those in an accessible way. There's also accessibility, though, in terms of, to Stephanie's points, accessible regardless of one's choice of or access to technology. I'll share another brief stat. Just over 40 million members of the American public still lack access to high-speed internet. So we need to think about how are we designing services that can be accessed by folks who either don't have access to certain digital capabilities, or maybe they don't want to. They don't want to access things digitally. And so that's a big reason why we were very deliberate in thinking about our policy as it's digital first, it's not digital only. And then lastly, we're thinking about accessibility in terms of how do we make our services accessible regardless of one's familiarity with the government or a topic. In the US, we have 430 plus agencies and sub-agencies, and it shouldn't be on the public to know what each does. Likewise, it shouldn't be on the public to sort through really complicated legalese to figure out what they might be eligible for, what they might need to do to access a given benefit or service. And so being much more public in, less government out, I think is something that we're trying to do a better job of. We're not quite there yet, but it is really important when we think about accessibility in kind of the broad sense.
Thank you, Jonathan. Oh, hello. Thank you, Jonathan. Dino, did you want to add to that?
Sure. Thank you. Hello? I don't think is it on? So at Accessibility Standards Canada, we have a lot going on in the area of digitization. But I'll focus on three things. First, we conduct inclusive research in the area of digitization. So what we do is, this is led by persons with disability. They begin by searching the globe for the best practices. They bring it back to Canada, and they add their lived experience. From there, they add other research and methodologies on that, and the final product is a recommendation to our technical committees on how to create a frictionless digitalization or service. The second one is that I'd like to focus on our technical committees, the individuals who develop our standards, adapt a mindset that accessibility is good for everyone. So this gives everybody the encouragement to go beyond what's accepted right now. So we're always searching to push the envelope. And what they're really doing, another aspect of what they're doing that's very unique here in Canada compared to other places in the world, is that they're shifting the focus from minimum requirements to equitable requirements. What this means, and I'll give you an example. So recently, we have published our technical guide on accessible and equitable artificial intelligence systems. In this guide, we show how important it is, how to actually get the result that there isn't any unintentional bias to vulnerable populations as a result of artificial intelligence systems. Also, in certain circumstances, we need human oversight. So human oversight cannot be fully removed completely. As we heard from the other speakers, that one option or one channel does not work, so we need different channels. And lastly, what I'll leave with you and what we've been focusing on is, we believe at Accessibility Standards Canada, we believe that accessibility is everyone's responsibility. And what that means is that, how we demonstrate, one aspect of demonstrating that is that we make all our documents, all our studies free for everybody to use. And we publish them in multiple formats, whether that might be plain language, ASL, LSQ, HTML, and so on. So maybe I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
You get an applause there, Dino. That's fantastic. I'll pass it on to Clara.
Sure. So I'm glad to be here with you today and with my esteemed colleagues here on the panel. Just building on everyone's responsibility for accessibility, which is really key, and it's all your responsibility as well. So maybe take a few moments to reflect on what have you done to include persons with disability? What have you done to remove barriers and proactively remove barriers for persons with disability in the workplace? What have you done to bring in talent with disabilities in the workplace? And what have you done to leverage accessibility to innovate? Because accessibility is about innovation. It's about thinking creatively out of the box and bringing in different use case scenarios where persons with disabilities are using voice technology. They're using different aspects of technology like closed captioning. Persons with disabilities help us think creatively in terms of pushing the envelope on digital and services. So think of it as an opportunity to innovate. And to me, accessibility is innovation, quite honestly. Where I'm coming from is the Office of Public Service Accessibility. And in our role, we are encouraging the government to lead by example, the Government of Canada, in implementing accessibility and implementing the Accessible Canada Act and the requirements of the Act. And in this role, we have received government funding for a centralized enabling workplace fund that has sunsetted now, but we have funded projects that allowed us to innovate to remove barriers for persons with disabilities. And one of the projects I'd like to talk to you a little bit more about as the panel discusses various examples is the GC Workplace Accessibility Passport, which has been adopted by 60 organizations in the federal government. And this passport pushes that cultural shift that's needed inside the public service so that we talk about barriers employees encounter in the workplace, barriers in the environment. We're not talking about your disability, we're talking about the barriers you encounter and the solutions you need in the workplace for you to be productive, for you to succeed in the workplace. And using this passport, employees with disabilities document and have conversations with their manager about the tools they need in the workplace. They don't talk about their disability. There's nothing to fix. What's needed is the environmental barriers to be removed. And part of these environmental barriers include digital accessibility barriers. Is your website available easily for employees with disabilities to access and apply to it? Are your internal applications accessible to employees with disabilities using screen readers or using voice technology or using various types of technologies? That's what we need to be working hard towards, is inclusion and not exclusion.
Thank you, Clara. Actually, you're dovetailing on maybe a follow-up question for all of my other panelists on this. I've heard through all of your opening remarks, if I can say that, an articulation towards a digital divide among certain one of our constituencies and our citizens and our services, as well as, and Clara very well articulated in certain ways of addressing some of our barriers. Would you speak a little bit more about your experiences in both the challenges and the barriers? Who would like to interject first, if I may? Stephanie.
Well, as I mentioned in the first, we have to remember that not everybody is the same, right? We're all individuals. Everybody in this room is different, and everybody out there is different. And so who's most at risk of being disadvantaged by a shift to digitalization? It's people in poverty. It is rural and remote communities and the people that live there. It's seniors. It's people with disabilities, particularly people with cognitive disabilities or neurodivergence by way of something like dyslexia that makes reading difficult. These are real challenges, and these folks, if we're not designing for them from the beginning, are likely to be left out. But I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. And this is where the Accessible Canada Act really comes in and where it codifies the requirements for all decisions to be made with accessibility in mind, to prevent the building of barriers from the beginning. And the way it does this is by requiring that people with disabilities be consulted in the process of identifying what those barriers are or could be. And it's an iterative, ongoing process. It's not a one and done, check the box, yeah, we talked to somebody who has a disability. It's bigger than that. But this is a big cultural shift in thinking about how we do business as government. And it's also a big cultural shift in thinking in how corporations are doing business. And whether or not those corporations are covered under the Act or not. When I was at another panel recently, a co-presenter from Boeing used this language. If your accessibility team doesn't have people with disabilities on it, you're doing it wrong. Bringing people with disabilities into the process, whether that be as employees preferably, or as contractors or consultants on a paid basis, don't ask for them to do this for free, period. Their expertise has value. If you need it, it's something you should pay for. So, thanks. But that's a really big piece of doing this work. It's about connecting and talking to the people who know what the problems are and what the solutions could be. They're just as likely to be able to bring you an idea for a solution as they are to bring forward a problem. And we know that organizations that hire people with disabilities, whether they be corporate or otherwise, are more innovative, have better outcomes, better profitability, better work cultures. So there's no reason not to do it, short of we're afraid and we don't know how. So take that home.
Merci, Stéphanie. Thank you, Stéphanie. Jonathan, did you want to add?
Yeah, I want to add want to echo the comment on bringing in folks with lived experiences that can contribute to this space. There is no substitute for that, and we all need to do a better job of that. I would also say, though, in addition to that, you may not have had that lived experience, but you can still take steps to try to understand what it's like. Something that we actually did for our office is we set up a dedicated workstation with various types of assistive technology products so that our policy teams could use those and try to see what would it be like to access a popular website or digital service using a screen reader as an example. So I would just encourage folks that, or say that regardless of your background or your lived experience, you can take steps to try to better understand what it is like to interact with certain websites or digital services using some of these technologies, and would just really encourage folks to do more of that. Maybe one other thing I'll add is in terms of, the question was who's at the highest risk of potentially being left out of the equation here. Stephanie mentioned a number of the specific groups, but I think in general it's certain disadvantaged communities. I think back to a few years back, my father had passed away, and I was trying to help my mother figure out what health insurance options might be applicable to her in that given situation, and spent countless nights on the phone doing research, trying to understand very, very complicated requirements. And what really struck me is, we were really fortunate that I had the time and the ability to do that, and it was still really complicated. But you think about situations where maybe you don't have the time, or you don't have family who can help you. And so the folks that are most at risk are the ones that might not have the right support network around them to help them through what can be really, really complicated processes and subject matters that are kind of prerequisites for accessing certain government benefits and services.
Thank you, Jonathan. Martin, did you want to add anything to that from the government of Quebec?
We're dealing with a lot of content, and I think it's about 50% of people from Quebec, or maybe I think it's the same percentage across the nation, that have literacy skills that falls behind the high school level. So that's a huge friction or accessibility problem, and you have to work on those standards for producing content that is at the right level of literacy. But you also have to work upstream, because all the problems seems to be upstream when you always negotiate when you're producing content with legal, with policymakers, with communication people. And whenever you make compromises or find common grounds, as we used to do in government, we may find a solution that's not working for the user. But we're very content because we found those common grounds, but there's a gap for the user. So we need to work on the standard side and also on the governance side.
Thank you, Martin. Dino, Clara, did you want to add to those remarks? Dino?
There's been a lot of really good points. One of the point that maybe I'll build on is that like friction, as we're talking here, or the experience of a person's disability is individual, so it can't be generalized and everybody experiences it differently. And what we know that this becomes very multidimensional as when Statistics Canada, the recent survey on disabilities in Canada, the recent survey indicated that 27% of Canadians identify with one disability. We know out of the 27%, 40% of those individuals identify with two or more. And as we age, this increases. So the same survey from Statistics Canada indicated that 42% of seniors that identified with a disability actually have 4 concurring disabilities. So this tells us is that what we're trying, it's very difficult to identify all those barriers. And that we need different approaches, and it's very multidimensional. So and then from our point of view, for Accessibility Standards Canada, what we're trying to do is build a culture of nothing without us, supported by intersectionality to try to address, try to get as many perspectives as possible. And out of the hundreds of individuals who develop our standards, 50% of them over 50% of them identify as persons with disabilities, close to 60%. Out of the thousands of people that do our inclusive research, again, over 50% identify as persons with disabilities. But what is really noteworthy is that 80% of the individuals that are working with us in developing standards and research identify as part of an equity-deserving group. So we're trying to incorporate all those perspectives as we address these challenges. Thanks.
Thank you, Dino. Clara?
Yes, thank you. And just following up on what Dino said in terms of some numbers. So there are some challenges, of course. Just for you to be aware, there are 850,000 persons with disabilities in Canada who have the potential to work and are not employed. And this month, October, is the National Disability Employment Month. So what have we done? What have our organizations done to bring talent in? The Government of Canada has put in place a mandate to employ 5,000 employees with disabilities by 2025. We have come up to 4,000 in 2024, which is great. But then we bring talent in. We want to retain that talent, and we want to ensure that talent also advances, that there's opportunities for promotion. We're not doing well on the promotion level. Persons with disabilities have the lowest promotion rate. They're actually negative compared to other employment equity groups. So there are certain barriers that persons with disabilities continue to face even while in the labor market or even when we bring them into the government. That's an employment challenge for us that we need to continue to work on. The second aspect of this work that's challenging is upskilling. Upskilling managers so they become disability confident, so they create these inclusive workplaces for the employees. Bringing talent into the digital space. Let's bring that talent in so that we are creating those applications that are inclusive, that are designed to be accessible. And also, I'm finding when I work with developers as well, they lack the training and knowledge in how to incorporate the Web Conformance Accessibility Guidelines under the wonderful standard that has now become official standard in government, the EN 301549, under which in 2018 they incorporated the WCAG, the Workplace the Web Conformance Accessibility Guidelines. Developers don't know about these guidelines. They don't know how to code accessible. So let's give them the certification. Let's equip them to know how to develop applications accessibly. And the third aspect of the challenge I think that we're facing, and probably Stephanie would speak more about it too, is ensuring that we prioritize funding for accessibility, especially in an era of fiscal constraint. We need to be continuing to work to achieve the requirements of the Accessible Canada Act for a barrier-free Canada by 2040. And we need to be funding this continuously. Let's not cut funding on those projects that are already in place. I've heard of various projects in different departments where really I call them our, drawing on an Indigenous elders term, rainbow warriors who are out there pushing for accessibility and implementing programs to ensure their departments are accessible by default. Let's continue funding these programs.
Thank you, Clara. That's great. Get an applause. I'll follow up with your comment. Maybe a little bit more on also the participation citoyenne, the French word for the day. Citizen participation, which I'm hearing as from Stephanie and from Jonathan and also from you and Martin, in terms of interventions and how to seek support from public servants, but also more importantly from citizens through our policymakers in getting and co-designing services and using digital transformation as a way of fundamentally transforming the way we work and deliver to the public. How do you see this articulated? I'm going to start with Stephanie, if that's okay. Wait.
I would ask individuals to define co-design. I don't think people understand what it means. I think we have good intentions. So we have a project and we say, we need to co-design this with people with disabilities. So we ask people with disabilities, we ask a person who happens to have a disability to tell us what they think. And then we take that away and we say, yep, so we're good. That is not co-design. It is also not extensive, right? As Dino said, people with disabilities are diverse. And they are, and getting it right is really complex because it's very individual. And it's intermingled, multiple disabilities, other issues. It's not easy. We have to accept that. We have to be honest about that. Again, my friend from Boeing clarified that the other day for me when I said, come on, it's not rocket science. He says, actually it is. And I said, okay, fair enough. We were talking about planes. But the reality is accessibility is that complex. And if we're not honest about that, then we're not doing anybody any favors. But we have to have that full circle thinking from the beginning. And that's why we really have to redesign our processes and bring people in, right? It's not just about talking to the public, consulting the public, because we're good at consulting the public. And I take this back to my political career before this job. We're good at consulting with the public, but we're not good at re-engaging and truly speaking with and sharing with the public. We take, we don't give. And I think if you're going to do this right, it's about actually engaging. And that is difficult and it is scary because we don't know what they're going to say. And I've never dealt with this before, and that makes me uncomfortable. And somebody might tell me what I really like doesn't work. And those are things we have to accept and be really honest about up front. And that's why it's so important we do it from the beginning. So yes, thank you. Thank you, Clara. Budgets matter. Accessibility is not a charitable exercise. It is a requirement. It is law.
Merci, Stephanie. Thank you, Stephanie. Jonathan, did you want to add to that? And then Martin.
Sure. Maybe two comments on this. On the design front, I echo the sentiment about real co-design versus just getting some feedback from some folks. I think also just want to emphasize the importance of designing or incorporating those perspectives early in the process. I think in our ecosystem, too often, we're thinking about this as a remediation exercise. We are trying to take currently inaccessible websites and services and make them accessible, as opposed to thinking about being accessible by default and incorporating it earlier into the design process. So really, really important to move that more upstream. I think maybe the other just quick comment I'll make here is, in addition to the upfront involvement, making sure that we're giving members of our respective publics that we serve the ability to constantly provide feedback. We've done some work around trying to create better visibility around each of our agencies' accessibility policies, providing a forum that folks can go to provide feedback on services that are not currently accessible. And so I think that's kind of the second part of the equation. If part one is the how do you get folks involved in the design process, part two is how are you collecting feedback on an ongoing basis so that maybe we did everything right from a design process, but for whatever reason, something still wasn't as accessible as it needed to be. We need to have the feedback mechanisms to capture that and be able to continue to improve and close those gaps as we go.
Thank you. Martin, did you want to add to that?
Well, about co-designing, we're very good at making surveys and making focus group, but these are not good practices for design. And that's a very hard thing to do. When we're dealing with digital transformation, you have to adopt new skills and leave old practices. So this is very hard. So you have to do user tests and card sorting and user testing. And the idea is to bring the voice of citizens to the table, because you're not going to convince anyone only with authorities and who's in charge. But when you bring the voice of citizens to the table, it's working for everybody.
Thank you, Dino, as acting CIO or CIO, how do you feel about all of what you've heard up to now? Oh, sorry? Oh, you can't hear. How do you feel? Hello? How do you feel about what you heard from your colleagues in terms of co-designing as CIO for Accessibility Canada?
I think a lot of good points were made. I'd like to make maybe a little bit of a distinction, maybe build on what Stephanie had said. With co-design, it's important to take maybe like maybe an inclusive mindset as opposed to starting from the middle or from the average and building on that. I think it's what we do at Accessibility Standards Canada. We start more on the edge, for lack of a better word, and try to find the ones with the situations with multi-barriers or more complex, because we know that if we could solve or address those ones, everybody else comes along. And it's really, once we begin this process of design, co-design or inclusive design, also what we learned as maybe as a best practice is to ensure that there's every accommodation that's required is provided so that every individual can participate in an equitable manner. So if that means ASL, if that means captions, if that means compensation, it means extra time, all that needs to be included. So you have the not only like the thought process around co-design, but the actual how it's being conducted and the support system around it to ensure that it's done in an equitable manner. Thanks.
So at this point, maybe I could open up the mic for one or two questions. I think we have enough time for one or two questions. So if anybody would want to ask a question, there's two microphones over there, and I can still use with my glasses, I can still see you, because the lights are very bright over here. First question, over to you.
Can I move it down? I'm short. I'm just a bit surprised that the first thing that you open with is that you don't have a phone number. So my question is then, is that going to be remedied? And what's being done around the thinking around that? Because from an accessibility viewpoint, I think that should be corrected, right?
I am learning how to navigate in the federal government. And so is it remedied? No. I mean, we do have phone numbers. They're just not public because they don't have a person behind them to answer them. There is not a, et cetera. But yes, will it be remedied? Yes. But I use it as an example for two reasons. One, to say, nobody's getting everything right, right? So nobody in the room should feel like, oh, we haven't done that, and oh, we don't know how to do that. Look, nobody's got it all sorted out. There are problems, even when you think you've got it all right. The second thing is that I'm not the only one, right? This was sort of a big piece of government. Most of government is trying to move online, and even if there is a phone number, a lot of times super hard to find. So that's equally as bad, right? If you have to go online to find the phone number, right? So how do we start to think about that more broadly? It's a bigger conversation and a bigger question, but yeah, we'll find a solution.
Is there a follow-up question or another question? Yes?
Yeah,
Over to
I
you.
have a question. So the department that we work for, the majority of our audience or those that we serve, most of them have a disability. Now, our team is quite small, and while we are trying to do some work in increasing our accessibility across everything, but we don't have anyone with a disability that's on the team. So how would we go about engaging someone or a group of people to help us make sure that what we're doing is going to, affect our audience or serve our audience with our user testing? So how would we go about doing that?
Clara?
So first of all, kudos to you. Congratulations that you're working towards that. So how we've done it is, like I said, we're working on this GC Workplace Accessibility Passport, which we've designed with users using the principle of nothing without us, which is under the Accessible Canada Act. And you can tap into your Persons with Disabilities network within your department, reach out to them, engage them in your process. Persons with disabilities love to work with you and provide advice. As long as you, as Stephanie has said, you really need to ensure there's meaningful engagement. Because if it's simply symbolic, you're actually, in a way, creating unequal situations. So you need to really meaningfully engage, really listen, and incorporate this feedback, and then return to the users. Engage them throughout the process iteratively. So what we've done in our work, we prototyped an early model of the passport, which was a Word document. Now we are implementing a digital version. We've gone through 3 rounds of accessibility testing. I mean, you need to continue doing accessibility testing. So you need to, whatever you're developing, don't leave it till the end. And I've heard other speakers throughout the day say that. Fail forward, do it earlier on. Don't remediate, as Jonathan said. Don't wait for remediation, do it early on, and constantly iterate using those principles of really effective product design and product development. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to add anything else.
Do you know? No? Nope. Okay. Merci. Maybe the next question.
Hi, thank you very much. A lot of the solutions that I've heard are ones that would be much more easily executed by leadership. We have a room full of worker bees, of folks that are really eager to help, and no one involved in accessibility is doing it out of a should. There's a deep want to make a difference. And a lot of the differences I hear are people who control budgets, people who hire, people who are elected to do these things, and not perhaps as many practical solutions for folks like us, the many that are here that want to make a difference. My DG responded to my question of, hey, we're choosing SharePoint for our intranet and it's not accessible. He said, well, the government of Canada bought it, so we're going to use it. And so how do you suggest from the bottom that we make a difference when we're not the ones making the decisions? Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to start, Clara? Then maybe I'll have some of my colleagues respond.
I love your question. Really good question. Did you listen to Alex Binet today? He's all about, like, let's be truthful, let's be authentic, let's speak truth to power. I mean, we have to point these things out, and we can't just allow persons with disabilities to do it on their own. I've seen departments form accessibility networks so that it's not just persons with disabilities that are, having these networks, that it cuts across and you build allyship. But you definitely need to be working with others to address these points. So, I mean, we have requirements to meet. We have standards that are put in place by the leadership, through the leadership of the Accessibility Standards Office. I mean, I'm happy to speak to you more like one-on-one and to give you ideas. And I really do see lots of good work across the government where people are implementing solutions. We just have to kind of connect you all together so that you learn from each other. I wouldn't say SharePoint is inaccessible. I think it can be made more accessible. And I don't think accessibility is either or type of thing. There's a range of, I guess, accessibility continuum, right? So I think Microsoft has some great features, that they've built, the closed captioning through MS Teams. There's lots of really good features. SharePoint can be made more accessible. I'd love to talk to you about how we could work together to ensure your department is leveraging it in a proper way.
So maybe I can expand a little bit on that, because a theme that's also recurring is innovation. And I've heard this quite often, and SharePoint is pushing us also towards innovation. Martin and Jonathan, do you have any, and Dino over there, do you have, Stephanie, anything to add in terms of on the innovation component?
No? Okay, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm going to think about it.
Did you want to add anything in terms of maybe on an innovation perspective to improve accessibilities? Wait.
I was actually going to make a quick follow-up to the comments just there on. There's something here too about making sure that we have the right trainings in place so that the folks who are building content and products day in, day out know the steps they can take. Sometimes it could be as simple as, if you're creating a document with images, are you adding alt text under the images? Are you adding the right tags within the document? And admittedly, this is something that I'm not always the best at. I have accessibility SME on my team who will sometimes remind me that you sent me a PowerPoint and you didn't take those steps. So I think there's work to be done to just build that awareness of, one, how important this is, but two, there are a number of steps that all of us can take in just our everyday roles to get ahead of some of the common challenges that come up in the accessibility space.
My personal experience is that persons with disabilities are innovators. They face barriers every day and they innovate every day. And in our office, we usually bring people together, because 40% of our staff identify as person with disability. And it's interesting to see what kind of solutions might not be the best, might be full encompass solutions, but we have solutions that are workable in that moment and for a certain period of time till we can get a more comprehensive solution. So I think again, bringing persons with disabilities to the table and understanding the different perspectives and finding those solutions and working and truly engaging is one way of innovating.
And if I could, and I'm just going to go back a little bit to that other question. I agree completely with the innovation and the solutions, but I also don't want to lose what was said about leadership and folks trying to do the work. There is a divide. Leadership is essential in the process. If leaders aren't driving this, it won't happen. However, it also is a bottom-up thing. And everybody has an opportunity to help make it better. Whether that is the little things, like making sure your own internal localized processes with your team are accessible and that you're talking about it. Put your hand up at the meeting and say, do we have an accessibility lens on this decision we're making today? And if the answer is, we don't have this thing or there's a problem, are you elevating it? Or are we just waiting until somebody tells us that we're going to get the money? Let's not wait till somebody tells us that we're going to get the money. Let's start asking for the money. And you know, it's two directions, for sure. Leadership matters. I say it all the time. Culture won't change until the leadership expects it to change. However, it's an everybody's business game, and everybody has opportunity to help drive the agenda of accessibility and inclusion, and to just on a person-by-person basis, make it work better.
We have one last question, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
Working? Okay. So I was recently part of a accessibility committee panel discussion, and somebody raised a concern about sign languages and the sign languages that we were capturing in our systems. So basically, we were capturing the fact that somebody used sign language, but not the different types of sign languages. So after doing some research, I found that there's multiple sign languages used in Canada, and not just ASL and QSL. So my question is, do we have a published standard on the list of sign languages, which I wasn't able to find? And then to what extent, like, assuming that the published standard is a short list like ASL, QSL, like to what extent or to what point do we open up that accessibility to other sign languages, because her concern was that we were causing barriers by not capturing all of the different 5 to 6 sign languages that are in use.
Who would like to respond?
I'll tackle this one with the answer such that it is. There are a whole lot more sign languages than that. This is a really tricky issue. So I can't speak to your situation because I don't know what committee it was, for what purpose, for what. But we have to recognize that sign languages are the primary languages of the people who use them. So no different than my first language is English. There are others in the room whose first language is something else. And we recognize in Canada we have 2 official languages plus sign languages. ASL, LSQ, and Indigenous sign languages. We acknowledge that. There isn't a standard in place on how to incorporate sign languages and when and whatever, because there's a lot of complexity to that. There are very few interpreters in interpreters and translators, and there's 2 different things, and it's a complex space with limited resources. And so it wouldn't be possible to always have folks there. What is important is that we start asking the questions of people when we're hosting an event, for example, or when we're going to be publishing a document. Who's that document going to? Is it going to the general public? If it is, then we need to make sure, if it's important, it's emergency preparedness, for example, it needs to be translated and available in all of these languages. However, we also have to recognize that with limited resources, we don't want to be pulling those resources away from where they're needed on a day-to-day basis for people to be getting their doctor's appointments or other things. What is important is that we ask the question. So we're hosting an event. What accommodations do you need? That should be a question you don't ask just when somebody puts up their hand and says, I have a disability. That's something you ask of everyone. No different than, does anybody have any dietary restrictions? That was something that 20 years ago nobody ever asked, and it's standardized now. We have to do the same thing with accessibility. And then when somebody puts their need forward, whatever that need might be, whether it's captioning, a sign language, or a scent-free environment, a peanut-free environment, whatever it might be, we have to act on that, and we have to be committed to that.
At this point, I'd like to thank all of our panelists. Very distinguished. Thank you for your interventions. Very much thank you. Please, a round of applause. Merci. Un grand merci.